I'm Sophie Marie Odom, Lifestyle Magazine's editor, and welcome to the Motability Lifestyle Pod. In this podcast, we invite our friends from the disability community into the studio for a conversation about how we can all live our best life, particularly when navigating a disabling world. But this episode is a little different. As we're sure you've seen in the press, there's been lots of negative commentary and harmful stereotypes surrounding the Motability Scheme and the disabled people who use it. The Motability Scheme, which was founded nearly 50 years ago, has given over 6 million disabled people the freedom and independence to access employment, education and healthcare. But its future is under threat as the government decides whether VAT should be added to the vehicles leased through the scheme. In this episode of the pod, my co-host Samantha Renke, broadcaster and disability rights campaigner, speaks with Motability Foundation's Chief Executive Officer Nigel Fletcher to discuss how the scheme is a lifeline and not a handout for many disabled people. Nigel will help us understand why the scheme is under so much scrutiny at the moment, address customer concerns, and explain how the foundation is working on a resolution. Over to you, Sam.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me on this very special Motability Lifestyle Pod. We are talking about something that is needed today, very important. And I hope by the end of our conversation, we will hopefully ensure that our listeners who are hardcore fans, may I say, are a little bit more resolved in their anxiety, perhaps, with what's happening at the moment. So let's kind of get to the beginning. Let's start at the beginning. So, you know, the listeners might want to know a little bit more about the Motability Scheme and the Motability Foundation. What's the difference between the two? Is there a difference? Because I wasn't actually aware that there was a difference. Would you like to kind of clarify the difference between the two?
I will. We get this question often, as you can imagine. People just think of Motability, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
But actually, there are three different things in Motability.
Wait, hang on, three? Wait, what?
We've got Motability Operations, Motability Scheme, and Motability Foundation. So the Motability Foundation, Sam, is a charity, and the charity was formed back in 1977. And the charity has a really wide objective, and that's to help disabled people with their transport needs.
Yeah.
We know that the transport equity gap is around 30%. Disabled people make 30% less journeys than non-disabled people.
Huge.
And the charity exists to close that gap. But it doesn't just deliver the scheme. It wants to deliver anything it possibly can in order to close that transport equity gap. And the biggest thing it delivers is the Motability Scheme. And the Motability Scheme, as you probably know, has hundreds of thousands of customers, beneficiaries of the charity, that we're providing leased cars and vans and wheelchair accessible vehicles and all kinds of solutions to. So there is a distinct difference between the two. The charity has a much wider objective than the scheme itself.
I love that. And for me, I recently moved from London to rural Lancashire, and what struck me is living in a space where public transport in the city was relatively accessible. People may challenge me on that, but across the board it was accessible as a wheelchair user, at least. And now I'm living somewhere where not one of the local taxi firms has got a WAV. And that is mind-blowing for me. So it's music to my ears to hear how the foundation is really amplifying and recognises, the holistic barriers that disabled people face when they access transport. And I guess, not everyone lives in a city. Most of us live in smaller towns, rural areas. Therefore, public transport is sketchy at best. And the only alternative is having a Motability car. I remember coming to this country when I was very, very little from Germany, and my family applied for a Motability car, and we were very much a working class family. It was a struggle. I was quite an unwell child. My mum, who was, a foreigner, so to speak, in this country, really struggled with not being around her support network. So I know that having a Motability car was a lifeline for our family. And I remember at the time, it was always down to me to pick which colour the car, and I always went for a red car. So for years upon years upon years, all we had were red cars, which I think my dad was secretly happy about because it was a bit of a Ferrari moment for him. So I'm delighted that the scheme exists. However, it's come under some scrutiny, shall we say. It's quite a scary time for the Motability Scheme. Disabled people have once again, I guess, been, and this is my opinion, scapegoated. And there's a lot of people out there who are worried that their lifeline, because that's what it is, their lifeline to the outside world, to accessing the community, to being a productive member of society, going to work and so on, that may be taken away or may be reduced. What do you personally feel about what's going on at the moment and the landscape as it is at the moment? What's your take on it?
It's a really serious question, isn't it? It's a really important question. And just to relate to how it feels to have a car taken away from you, for example, what that would feel like. I've got a visual impairment. I've got around a third of a normal sight. So I can't drive myself. But what technology has done for me, apps on the phone, is really open up public transport for me. So I can see on my phone what platform to go to, what train I need to get on, when the bus is coming, what the next bus is going to be. And it's absolutely amazing. But on the way home a couple of weeks ago, I was coming through Liverpool Street Station, and for some reason, none of the apps were working, which meant I just had absolutely no idea what train to get on. And I was completely confuddled, really. I just honestly
discombobulated.
Discombobulated. I had no idea what to do. There was no members of staff there. There was no information kiosk. And you kind of suddenly realise that something that's been put in place that has resolved a barrier for you to travel, and when that thing just disappears, it's it causes anxiety, it causes stress, it causes confusion, and I personally experienced that the other week. So I'm deeply worried about some of the speculation and some of the commentary around disabled people and their need to travel. I mean, travelling and transport is such a common part of society now, isn't it? Like to access work, to access education, access health appointments, go and see family and friends. It's just essential to travel, isn't it? So
absolutely.
When people are talking about taking away something that allows disabled people to travel, it really is taking away a real core part of their life.
And it is. And for me, just coming here to the studio today, I can completely relate to you. I rely on technology. I am in my power wheelchair. I'm normally a manual chair user. However, when I got this, I call it the Lamborghini of wheelchairs. When I got upgraded, this opened so many doors for me. I popped into a restaurant this morning and it was all self-checkouts, which technology at its finest, not necessarily if you're disabled, because sometimes we rely on that person-on-person interaction. And they actually had a lower screen, a lower till with a lower screen. And I think, for me, just acknowledging that our lives are slightly different, that this world was not made for us, so it's not extra. I think that's what we kind of get a little bit confused, particularly when you don't have disability in your life, or you don't, associate or relate to disability necessarily. We are often deluded into thinking that what we want is special or extra, but it's not. It's just about having fairness. It's about having access to everything that our peers in society have access to. And that lower till this morning, not only did it make my life easier because I could independently order my own breakfast, but I think the key word here is I felt welcomed. And I think the Motability Scheme does exactly that. It says, it's not asking about anything extra. It's just saying that we see you and we want you to be part of the community. Now, you've been CEO for, I believe, 2 years now, just over 2 years?
Almost 2 years, I think. Almost.
Oh, you're tentatively saying that. It feels like a lifetime already. Almost 2 years now. Can you share with us some of the more pleasant stories or the most impactful stories that you have from service users, Motability Scheme, drivers, that really brings home the importance of, having a car, having a WAV car?
Yeah, absolutely. Being a part of the foundation is amazing because of those stories, to be honest. So I think some of the most amazing stories that I've been touched by over the last 18 months or 2 years has been those stories where people have really grown with us. So one of the grant programs we run, for example, is for driving lessons. And before, anyone, can sometimes you end up in that problem area where you need an adapted vehicle. You need something specialised in order to be able to drive. You need to find a driving instructor who's willing to teach you to drive in those adapted vehicles before you can even join the scheme and get a car. So you end up in that kind of what comes first, the chicken or the egg kind of situation. And so some of the stories that I've seen over the last 18 months that really touch me are from, hearing from people, maybe 17, 18-year-olds who all their friends are learning to drive. I went through that myself. I can't drive myself. Everyone's finding their freedom. And you get kind of left behind as a disabled person.
Yeah.
And I've heard, there's many stories and examples of individuals that we've helped with driving lessons. We've helped them find a driving instructor. They've learned to drive. Then they've got a car on the scheme. They've then got their freedom and their independence. And then as their needs change and as their requirements change because their disability evolves, we've then started to change the cars and the vehicles around that disability as well. So it keeps them mobile and keeps the freedom for them. And you can track through, 10, 15 years of their life that we're helping them remain mobile. I think that's amazing, because if you imagine what their life would have been like without having that freedom and mobility, it would have been a completely different story. Maybe they wouldn't have even managed to get to work or done their college course, or it could have been a completely different path that they ended up taking.
I was a bit too precious when I was 17. All my friends were starting to learn to drive, and I was in the mindset that I will always be chauffeured. Now, I realise that maybe I can't be chauffeured around all my life. So I am actually looking into the scheme at the moment, now that I am essentially, I guess, forced to have to do so. And I don't mean that in a horrible way, just because of the limitations of where I live. I literally have to rely on either my PA, my personal assistant, or someone else in my family or extended, network to get me from A to B. And as we know, disabled people are at the mercy of a broken ableist systemic ableism. Caregivers may not turn up, infrastructures may not be there. So I think for a lot of disabled people, it's the only option to ensure that they have autonomy in their life, that they have independence in their life. It's so vital. And I think for me, I am only personally finding out myself how necessary the Motability Scheme is. It's amazing that here in the UK we have such a scheme on offer. I genuinely believe that, the UK is a leader in terms of really amplifying disabled people. We don't get it right all the time, but as someone who has travelled, I've been, lucky enough to travel to many, many different countries. I do come back to the UK and go, I feel a little safer. I feel a little more secure. I've got my independence back. And one of the reasons is because we have wonderful schemes like Motability Scheme. And surely we should be applauding that and being the biggest cheerleaders for initiatives out there, such as the Motability Scheme.
I couldn't agree more, Sam. I couldn't agree more. And we should be immensely proud, I think, of the Motability Scheme. You look at our rail infrastructure as an example, and it's really costly and hard to make it completely accessible. So something like the scheme is really important. And you referenced earlier on as well how difficult it is living in a rural location where you've got less public transport, you've got less options around you. Living in London is a little bit different. Every single taxi is accessible, and wouldn't it be lovely if the rest of the country was like that? But it's not.
That doesn't come without its difficulties. Respectfully, I lived in London for 12 years. I took a lot of taxis. Not all taxi drivers are happy about onboarding a wheelchair user.
Yeah, they won't stop.
I often describe it as playing Russian roulette. Would I get a cranky taxi driver who didn't really want to get the ramp out? The amount of times I still get asked, do you need the ramp? And I have to really hold it in not to come out with a sarcastic comment like, no, just fly.
I'm going to launch myself.
Just going to catapult myself into your vehicle. Even last night I went to an award and had a few issues, shall we say. And that in itself can put someone off even going out. I would say that I'm a confident individual who definitely can hold my own voice. But because of this shoddy, I'm going to call it shoddy, public transport infrastructure, because it isn't consistent, and I think that's key. When you can have provisions, but are they maintained? Are they consistent? Back in the day, London buses, when you press for the ramp, it was so humiliating. That's another thing, dehumanising disabled people. It used to go, wheelchair on board.
I remember that.
Wheelchair on board. And I remember getting on a bus early in the morning. It was raining, everyone was miserable. And then all of a sudden I roll on and it goes, wheelchair on board. And then everyone just glared at me. And I just went, morning! And broke the ice. But I think we are constantly, as disabled people, having to either be extra, having to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations, having to, have those pleasantries with taxi drivers who are not pleased about onboarding a wheelchair user or someone with a mobility aid and so on and so forth. Having your own vehicle or not having to put up with all of that is, again, invaluable, essentially. Unfortunately, we see ourselves once again in a situation after years of austerity, after seeing the pandemic dehumanise disabled people. We've seen potential welfare cuts. We've seen disabled people use as scapegoats across the board by all our government, irrespective of who is in charge, trying to claw back some money, and they're taking it from individuals who already have a higher living cost. We already are expected to pay out, I think on average, is it over £1,000 on average?
It's well over 1,000.
It's way over now.
The disability price tag.
The disability price tag. I know that a few years back, Scope announced it was £970 because of the cost of living crisis that soared to over £1,000. How does the Motability Scheme, play into that, and how does it benefit and help disabled people to keep those extra costs down?
Well, I think there's a number of things to think about there. I think you're right. We should be immensely proud of the of the Motability Scheme. It's something as a nation we have that a lot of other countries don't have. A lot of people will say that it's out of control. I've heard, lots of that kind of talk in the press.
In what respect?
Well, the Motability Scheme is out of control. It's far too big. It's too generous, and all of these kind of, negative stories around the Motability Scheme. And what I look at is that we've got around 860,000 people on the Motability Scheme. That's 1.2% of the population. I don't consider that to be out of control. No. I consider that to be the most in need people who need help with their transport, help with their mobility, those with most profound needs, helping them as a society. Now, not everyone with a disability can drive. I can't. I've got a disability. I can't drive because of my disability. So the scheme doesn't help me. But it helps it helps hugely in people's lives who can use it. So I think the Motability Scheme is getting a bit of a bad press at the moment, but actually it's an amazing scheme for disabled people. I
often feel, and again, it's my own personal feeling as a physically disabled woman, you're darned if you do and you're darned if you don't. So for me, it's about, do you want us to go to work? Do you want us to contribute to productivity? The economic, market, so to speak, or do you not? Because if you don't, then the only other alternative is to claim benefits. And again, I'm on benefits, no shame of claiming benefits whatsoever. It's there, it's a lifeline. We live in a welfare state, it's amazing. But again, the rhetoric and the way the media often portrays it's you want us to be this version of disability, this more pleasurable, palatable, normal, and I use that with air quotes. Is that the right? Am I doing a Joey from Friends? I don't know. Is that the right way to use it? And then so you either invest in us, which is essentially what the Motability Scheme is doing. You're investing in disabled people, essentially. That's what you're doing to help us have that independence.
I think you are right in a certain extent, but I would also point out that a disabled person is sacrificing their allowance, and their allowance of £77 a week for the higher rate mobility is just compensating a disabled person for the disability price tag, for the fact that their life costs a lot more than anyone else's life. So you're just sacrificing that £77 for a car instead. So I would argue whether it's an investment, it's the disabled person who's investing their allowance rather than anyone else. £12,000 over the period of a lease that a disabled person. So that's why I get quite unhappy about people saying these free Motability cars. Well, Sam, they're not free. A disabled person is sacrificing £12,000 of their allowance for that car.
Can we unpack that a little bit? Because I appreciate most of our listeners will come from the disability community. They'll be deaf, disabled, neurodivergent, but there will also be people that be listening who may be critics. Maybe those people who think that there are far too many cars being handed out willy-nilly. Can you explain very briefly the where the money comes from and originally, and what disabled people will then have to pay? Just because that's a really valid point, that actually we're not getting it for free.
No.
Similar to wheelchairs, we don't just get them for free, contrary to popular belief. Would you like to just elaborate on that?
Very happy to. So when you're disabled, I think it's fair, most of your listeners will know about personal independence payments, and those personal independence payments are designed to compensate you for the additional costs of life with a disability. Yep. And one part of the personal independence payment is called the higher rate mobility allowance. You have a lower rate, but you also have a higher rate, and it's only if you qualify for the higher rate can you join the Motability scheme. They're quite tough tests.
It's very tough.
I don't qualify for the higher rate. My disability doesn't impact me enough, although I can't drive and I struggle to get buses. I can't see buses coming. I struggle with trains, but I don't qualify for the higher rate mobility allowance. They are very tough, and we can dig into those tests, I think. It's a good question. But if you do qualify for the higher rate mobility allowance, you get that payment of, I think it's about £77 a week at the moment. And then you have a choice. You can either take that as cash, or you can sacrifice it and join the Motability scheme. Now, if you join the Motability scheme, there's a range of around 50 cars at the moment that you can choose from without any additional money being needed. Now, there's a load more cars on the scheme that you can access if you put down a down payment. We call it an advance purchase payment.
Just to clarify, a Lamborghini is not on the list.
A Lamborghini is not on the list.
To make that very clear.
Red cars are on the list, and you can pretend they're Ferraris, but unfortunately they won't be a Ferrari. You can put a sticker on it if you want, as long as you take it off before you give it back.
I love that. That was your professional head coming to play there. As long as you remove it before handing it back.
Before you hand it back. So, I would point out that a disabled person is choosing to use their allowance for a car, and that car is enabling them, to your previous point, get to work, get to school, access life, just do all the normal things that everyone else takes for granted.
More recent coverage has featured speculation that the Chancellor has plans to save £1.1 billion, to be precise, in the upcoming budget by making changes to the scheme, including removing the VAT exemption. Do you know, is there actually any truth to this? And what essentially does that mean for the scheme and disabled people, not just on the scheme, but thinking of applying for the scheme in the future?
I mean, it can be worrying, I think, for a lot of disabled people reading the press, not just, to your previous point, people attacking the Motability scheme, but then when you hear speculation that there's going to be an additional tax on the Motability scheme as well, and £1.1 billion sounds like a huge number. It is a huge number. None of us really know what the budget's going to contain before the budget is announced on the 26th of November. So we're all waiting to see what is included in the budget. What I can say is any additional tax cost on the Motability scheme will pass through to either price increases for customers or a reduced proposition for customers. The whole ecosystem of Motability is not for profit. Any profits that are made by Motability operations who run the scheme get donated back to the charity, and we distribute it to disabled people in grants.
Yeah.
So the whole system is not for profit.
Right.
So there's no one else profiteering from this scheme, and that's what I'm really proud of the scheme for that. You know, it's not a situation where you've got a private company profiteering from the scheme. So if you're gonna have any additional costs into the scheme, there's only two places for them to go really, and that is higher costs and fewer services.
I mean, it's a very scary time. Once again, disabled people are faced with uncertainty. We're faced with being vilified, and I say that because that's how I feel at the moment. It just seems to be a constant barrage of let's take away from perhaps members of society that won't fight back or won't use their voices. And I think for me, what I've really been trying to share with my friends and colleagues and, you know, my followers is the power of allyship and what a true disability ally looks like, and how can we, you know, be that voice on behalf of disabled people. So in your own words, how can you, if at all, reassure my community that whatever the outcome, the Motability Foundation is going to be that ally?
Absolutely. I mean, what I can guarantee is that we will work tirelessly to make sure the Motability Scheme remains as good as it possibly can be for disabled people. And that's what we've done for the last 50 years, and that's absolutely what we will carry on doing. We set targets for Motability operations to work towards, and they are things like the range of cars available on the scheme, the level of adaptations that are available on the scheme, what a wheelchair accessible vehicles look like on the scheme. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a really interesting case study, the wheelchair accessible vehicles. We invest £150 million a year into wheelchair accessible vehicles. Mm-hmm. Without that £150 million, they would be a lot more expensive. They're expensive already. They are expensive already. But without that £150 million, they would be, you know, unaffordable, I would say, to a lot of disabled people. So we will do our level best to make sure that the scheme is as affordable, as accessible, and has as much of the choice that disabled people, you know, need as they possibly can. That will get more difficult over time, especially if we have additional taxes to pay. Yeah. But we will be here and we will be absolutely advocating for disabled people to make sure the scheme carries on into the future.
And there'll be listeners who are already on the scheme. There'll be listeners like myself who are wanting to, call up and hopefully get on the scheme and get a grant for, you know, cars that have got lots of adaptations and techie bits. And I'm not a car person, but I did get quite excited when I went for a test drive in all the little buttons and things. And there'll be people who are, you know, maybe at college age and, you know, are those young people who are seeing their peers starting to learn to drive and are a little bit reluctant to take that plunge at the moment because we don't know what the outcome is. What is your message to all of them? Should people hold off applying? Should people continue as they are?
No, I think the scheme is here, and the scheme is currently available, and the scheme will continue to be available into the future. So I don't think there's any need for anyone to panic. The scheme will carry on providing everything it possibly can provide for people. So I wouldn't want anyone to worry about that. I think what will be the case is it might just get a bit more expensive. There might not quite be the choice that people are looking for. You referenced some grants there. The foundation do run some grant programs to help people access the scheme. So it might be that you need a particular type of adaptation or you need a particular type of vehicle that's more costly. Yep. We do have criteria. We tend to means test some of those grant programs because they can be really expensive vehicles. And we do also want to make sure the vehicles with grant funding are used as well. So are you using it to get to school? Are you using it to get to work? Are you using it for volunteering? You know, how are you going to use the vehicle once we've given a grant to get that vehicle? But I would encourage anyone who's thinking about joining the scheme or worried about the cost of joining the scheme to look up details about some of those grant programs and definitely go ahead, you know, and contact Motability Operations if you're interested in joining.
So essentially business as usual.
That's a good, I should have said that. Business as usual. Simple business as usual.
And, you know, if not, I think we're going to put you in a bathtub of beans. Okay. And we will live stream it and just make the money that way.
Well, I like beans.
Yeah.
And I'm always hungry. I mean, so I'm up for that.
I see it. I just see that as a great fundraiser if all else failed.
Am I allowed to eat the beans?
Would you eat cold beans?
I always eat cold beans. I never eat them straight out the can.
I thought we could be friends,
Straight
but I've
out
now
the can.
changed my mind
Have
a
you?
bit on that.
I do
No,
apologise.
Nigel.
Oh,
You've
dear.
ruined it. We just come to the end of the podcast and you've ruined it. On a serious note, because I don't want to make light of what is a very scary time, although I think that disabled people are troopers. We are resilient because we have to be. And I know that sometimes, making light is the only way to just get through this. But let's end on a high note, but a very serious note. Can you share with me again what you personally feel or have seen in your almost 2 years of CEO, some of those beautiful stories of how the Motability Scheme really does positively impact disabled people's lives? Can we end on one more story perhaps, and just one final message to our listeners, just to reassure them that the Motability Scheme are our champions?
Absolutely. That's why I'm here. That's why I took this job, because what the Motability Scheme does is absolutely amazing for the individuals on it. I see stories. It's so difficult to pick out a story to tell because there's so many of them to talk about. But some of those vehicles that we provide for people who have really quite profound needs. I would think about one I spoke about this morning. A young guy in his teens. I think he's 16. His mum and dad are really struggling to transport him around. Yeah. He has very specific care needs. He needs changing while he's out. He needs a separate compartment in the vehicle. And that family's just really struggled to access life. Mm-hmm. They can't get out and about. And through one of our grant programs, we've provided them with a vehicle that is absolutely specialised and bespoke to them. Yeah, it's got everything they need. It's got the hoists they need, the individual compartments, the changing chair, everything they need to now go out, and they can go on family trips.
Yeah.
They can go out for the day just like any other family can in the UK. And I think opening up people's lives, helping them access life is what the Motability Scheme is all about. And a lot of people in the country just take that for granted.
Yeah, I think they do.
And certainly the people who are criticising the scheme at the moment, I would say, take it for granted that they can get up in the morning or decide to go to the shops, and they can just go to the shops.
Yeah.
They don't have all of the issues with having to work out how to do that.
The reality is for many disabled people, disability is 365 days a year. Mm-hmm. And I know we spoke off air about the impact the pandemic had on people's mental health, people's sense of self-worth. And that is life for disabled people all the time. We don't need a global pandemic to restrict us and to stop us from living the lives that we deserve to live. So if any of the listeners out there who may be sceptical or who may think that, us disabled folk get everything and a golden unicorn, that is not true. Perhaps dig deep, find that empathy, find that compassion, and, ultimately engage with disabled people. Ask them to share their own journeys and their stories, because maybe it might surprise you. Maybe it might humble you and educate you from doing so. And I think that's all that disabled people want, is just to be given that platform to say, look, this is the reality. And, we want those real allies. So thank you for being an ally. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
I've loved speaking with you, and hopefully we'll be having a much more positive conversation in the months ahead. But irrespective, we will be having another conversation, no doubt.
I look forward to it, Sam.
No, thank you again.
Thank you.
And that's it for this very special episode of the Motability Lifestyle Pod. Thank you for your time, Nigel, and thank you to our producers, Charlotte Mason and Abby Sandler at Insanity Studios, and our editorial assistant, Lucy Rose at Wonderly. Just a reminder that you can also watch this episode complete with captions and BSL on our website, motabilitylifestyle.com. You can also find the full transcript here too, if you prefer. If you like this episode, click follow or subscribe. Tell all your friends, and please leave a review and rating if you're listening, or like and comment if you are watching. If you want to tell us what you thought, or if there's something you'd like to hear, come say hello on Instagram at Motability_lifestyle_mag. And for some behind the scenes content, follow us on TikTok at Mot Lifestyle Mag. You can also find us on YouTube at Motability Lifestyle Magazine. Finally, if you want more information about the Motability Scheme, go to motability.co.uk. Or if you want to learn more about the Motability Foundation, visit motabilityfoundation.org.uk. So there we have it. I am Samantha Renke. Thank you for listening and watching. I'll be back soon, hopefully, with our lovely Sophie, who is very much missed in the studio today, for another episode of the Motability Lifestyle Pod. Thank you for listening.